Today is June 24th, 2025. Over the past 24 hours, Iran has retaliated against the illegal act of war launched against them by the United States. The U.S. bombing and striking with missiles Iranian nuclear facilities across the country. The retaliation was very measured and calculated. There's a Reuters article regarding it. Iran fires missiles at U.S. base in Qatar. Trump calls for peace. Iran's missile attack on U.S. base in Qatar causes no injuries. Trump praises Iran's advance notice, urges peace with Israel. After this retaliation, President Trump announced on his social media platform, truthsocial.com, that he has organized a ceasefire. Congratulations to everyone. It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire. And then he has this incoherent timeline that it's supposed to unfold along. And down here, he's talking about how he bombed his way to peace in a war that the United States itself engineered, provoked, and has been waging ever since. Now, I have composed a thread, as they are called, on X, formerly Twitter. It is a series of posts regarding this supposed ceasefire. I'm going to read through that and add additional information when and if necessary. This is it here. I will put the link to it in the video description below. It is currently pinned at the top of my X timeline as of June 24th, 2025. Claims of U.S.-Israel-Iran ceasefire. And remember, this is not a war between Israel and Iran. This is a war between the U.S. and Iran. The U.S. has been fighting through Israel and now is directly fighting against Iran. You say, Brian, directly fighting against Iran? There's a ceasefire. Let us go through the post. After repeatedly lying to Iran, attacking it amid negotiations designed specifically to lure it into complacency, then announcing a 2-week deadline to decide on strikes on Iran that took place hours later, U.S. President Trump is claiming a ceasefire was agreed to. Iran would need to be beyond naive to accept or trust any word or action by the U.S. The U.S. has not spent decades trying to topple Iran amid its regional murder spree to suddenly abandon it. Its entire global aspirations, U.S. global aspirations, hinge on removing Iran before pivoting all the way to China in the Asia-Pacific region and then circling back to its proxy war against Russia being fought through Ukraine. It's called a division of labor and also strategic sequencing. I have shown you the policy papers stretching back years and having been written as recently as just a last year, just before President Trump came into office. And you can see, upon knowing this strategy, how the Biden administration set the stage very deliberately for President Trump's administration to carry all of this out. The United States has used Israel as a conduit to launder its war crimes and provocations through, and it will continue to do so. To effect regime change, the U.S. would benefit most by luring Iranian leaders out of cover and striking them, provoking retaliations and future war. The United States launched a war against Iran through Israel while posing as holding negotiations with Iran. Iran's guard was down, and Israel managed to kill a large number of senior military leaders, political leaders, civilians overseeing civilian infrastructure. Israel attacked, as well as Iranian scientists. It was an act of war, non-provoked act of war, absolutely illegal under international law as per the UN Charter. I continue. Iran requires not a Libya model, which is literally the phrase the US has used, telling Iran what arrangement it must accept. The Libya model means Iran giving up all of its nuclear aspirations so that the US can easily and without any hesitation or fear dismember the Iranian nation state to create a failed state where Iran is currently today, just as the US has done where Libya used to exist in North Africa. Iran requires a North Korea model, or else this process will repeat itself until it concludes in Washington and Wall Street's favor. What is the North Korea model? The North Korea model means creating a military deterrent, either conventional or nuclear, that prevents the United States or any of its proxies from ever striking Iran again. It also includes ironclad alliances with Russia and also China to, again, deter the United States and its proxies from ever striking at Iran again. Anything short of this is going to lead to a repeat of this and the eventual overthrow of the Iranian government, or if the US just overextends itself and its empire completely collapses, one or the other. I would not bet on one over the other. I would prepare for both possibilities. The same experts, this is very important to understand, the same experts who failed to see this war coming in the first place are now citing 5D chess strategies to explain how the Trump administration somehow averted a war entirely of its own creation and design to begin with. The same people who not only couldn't see this whole war coming a few weeks ago, who specifically said people warning about this war were completely wrong, that President Trump is fighting the deep state, he is the peace president, he will not strike Iran. The same people who have been categorically wrong about all of this as it has unfolded, these people are going to now try to explain to us what this ceasefire means. Be very careful about believing these people, trusting these people, listening to these people. Make sure when you're listening to them, you're trying to figure out what the truth is rather than seek someone to tell you what you wish the truth was. The US will only stop when, number one, people stop falling for this through excessive delusion, baseless hope, I would say. And two, the rest of the world unites to force the US to stop. There will be no change from within the United States. It is incumbent upon the multipolar world to create the conditions that constrain US aggression, stop it from interfering in other nations around the world and attacking nations all around the world, either through proxy war or through all-out war, which is what we have just watched the United States conduct over the last week or two. If a genuine ceasefire is actually reached, it will likely have been the work of Russia and China, quietly forcing the US to do so through private but sufficient threats, coupled with a graceful public exit ramp, though the chance of the US honoring it hover around 0%. We have no evidence that this happened. I have no idea if this is true or not, but the only possible way there is a genuine ceasefire in place is if Russia and China drew a red line, convinced the US that they would enforce it, and the US has agreed to accept that red line. That is the only possibility. The US, on its own, accepting a genuine ceasefire and peace with Iran, the chances of that is negative 1,000,000%. It just is, it's inconceivable. It is impossible. And again, the only people that will tell you it is possible are the same people who couldn't see this war coming in the first place. Please keep that in mind. Now I continue. This is another part of the thread. Any ceasefire Iran agrees to, not including ironclad security guarantees for Iran, victim of an egregious war of aggression launched in absolute contravention of international law per the UN Charter by two nuclear-armed powers and serial offenders of launching wars of aggression in the region. Iran has invaded no nation at all throughout the entire history of the modern state of Iran, not even one nation. The United States and Israel have invaded and destroyed and are illegally occupying multiple nations all across the region. So if Iran agrees, accepts, interprets this as a real ceasefire without these ironclad security guarantees, that is the height of folly, and it will be their own demise. Both the US and its Israeli proxies have pushed past political limits to strike on Iran. It'll be much easier into the future to strike Iran at any time and without warning by either aggressor, even after any ceasefire. This follows the same pattern of extended aggression after the 1990s Desert Storm. This is when the US went to war with Iraq in the 1990s. Upon concluding that military operation, declaring Iraq defeated, the US encircled Iraq militarily and continuously bombed that nation periodically for years and years until they sufficiently set the stage for all-out invasion and regime change in 2003. And Iraq exists as a failed state, destabilized, and still occupied by US troops to this day. That is Iran's fate. That is what they face right now. Likewise, the US partially invaded Syria and bombed it for years while backing militants on the ground to precipitate regime change finally in 2024, just last year, under the Biden administration, setting the stage for the Trump administration to provoke this very war. And who could forget when Israel decapitated Hezbollah's leadership in the middle of a ceasefire? Yes, this is a Guardian article from September 2024. And if you come down here, they admit that the attack decapitating Hezbollah's senior leadership came amidst a US and French-led international effort to broker a 3-week ceasefire with Hezbollah. So Israel, a US proxy, armed and enabled to carry out the strike and almost certainly using intelligence provided by the US for the strike, they killed Hezbollah's senior leadership in the middle of a ceasefire organized by the US. Do you spot a pattern? Continuity of agenda. Those claiming Trump is engineering some sort of complex peace suggest, for the first time this century, or ever for that matter, the US is choosing genuine peace over constant war. A war, by the way, the US itself engineered and waged in the first place, and a war these very same people failed to see coming because of their unfounded trust in and their belief that President Trump was the peace president. Okay, just keep in mind, people's track records matter. We are at a critical juncture where people must choose to believe what is true, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you, rather than cling to what they wish was true. And I want to refresh everybody's memory. This goes back to the initial Israeli strike on Iran. We knew everything Trump tells Reuters about Israel's strike on Iran. It admits in the article that, and other articles, that the US provided Israel essential intelligence and logistical support, that without this support, Israel would not have been able to carry out these strikes. This was a strike on Iran organized by the US, carried out through Israel. And then, of course, we know that the US itself then carried out strikes against Iran itself. The perceived limits preventing Israel or the US launching strikes on Iran, that limit is now gone. They can now strike Iran at any time of their choosing. Without warning, they can strike Iran. And so now they're proposing a ceasefire. They're once again luring Iran into a sense of complacency. Their leaders will then begin coming out of wherever they've been hiding from this war of aggression launched against them. And then the US and Israel will kill them. And they will attempt to topple their nation, just as they have done to every other nation in the region that they have targeted throughout the entire 21st century. This is not the exception. This is not some new leaf the US has turned over and now genuinely wants peace. If the US wanted peace, it would propose ironclad security guarantees. It would remove its military from the region. There's no reason for it to be surrounding Iran. There's no reason for it to be in the region at all in the first place. It would cut its significant military support from Israel. Absolutely every aspect of Israeli military power is a product of US money and material support. It would end all of this. And if it's not ending all of this, if it's not even ending any of it, then there is no genuine desire for peace. They are keeping all of the mechanisms in place that allowed them to launch this illegal act of war against Iran in the first place. People need to wake up. This is truly exhausting. Warning about this, showing people the plan written on a public piece of paper for the last 16 years, and people still choosing to ignore it because they would rather place their trust in Trump and refuse to admit they were wrong to do so. This is the Which Path to Persia? Options for a New America Strategy Toward Iran. This was a paper put out by the Brookings Institution all the way back in 2009. This is the plan. This is what the US, from the Bush Jr. administration, throughout the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, 4 years under the Biden administration, and now under the current Trump administration, verbatim, this is the plan. This is what they have done. They talk about diplomatic options. I have read from this many times before. They talk about how using negotiations would serve as cover for a strike on Iran. Create a pretext for strikes and serve as cover for those strikes. They also talk about all of the military options, an invasion, airstrikes, which the US has now carried out, and leave it to Bibi, referring to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. All of these options have now been exercised. What is left is toppling the Iranian government. They're talking about color revolution. They're talking about armed insurgency, and they're talking about supporting Iranian minority and opposition groups. They're talking about terrorist groups that the US is using, had used to topple the Syrian government and are now going to use to topple the Iranian government, and a coup, supporting a military move against the regime. And that brings me to evidence proudly presented to the global public by the Washington Post. This is part of that process. So even though President Trump says there's a ceasefire, all of the things necessary for this next step toward regime change are being put in place right now as we're talking. So this is from the Washington Post. Israeli warning call to top Iranian general. You have 12 hours to escape. An audio recording obtained by the Washington Post is a window into the covert campaign by Israeli intelligence to intimidate and divide Iranian military officials. This is what you do when you're trying to achieve regime change. The United States has done this in every single nation in the region. The US has targeted and toppled from the Middle East to North Africa, and of course Central Asia, if we count Afghanistan. They talk about not just killing these Iranian generals, but also targeting their families. The operative then suggested that Israel could train weapons on the general and his family at any moment. This is a war crime. This is just blatant terrorism. This is exactly what the US and Israel accuse Iran and its allies of doing. This is actual evidence that it's the US and Israel doing it. And not only have they threatened to kill women and children, they have actually already done it. That's what they have been doing throughout the duration of this war of aggression against Iran. And so this is evidence admitted by the Western media that the steps necessary towards regime change are already being taken. And so what we're watching is yet another ploy to lull Iran into complacency. There will be more attacks. There will be continued war. There will be regime change, or Iran will frustrate and defeat these attempts. Now, there are people who are going to try to defend the US-Israeli war of aggression against Iran. It's just categorically illegal. It is an illegal war of aggression against yet another nation in the region. A region on the other side of the planet from where the US is on a map. And they will cite US war propaganda as justification for this, such as Iran had nuclear weapons, or they were trying to build nuclear weapons, and so we had to stop them, even if that were true. First of all, you need to have evidence that it's true, which no evidence actually exists. Second of all, you have to go through the United Nations. You have to at least try to go through the United Nations, present your case, and be authorized to use force against another nation, or else now you are carrying out an illegal act of aggression on the global stage. You are just as bad in reality as you claimed Iran was in fiction. And we know that it's fiction because the US intelligence community itself said Iran had no nuclear weapons, was not pursuing nuclear weapons. Trump says intelligence director Tulsi Gabbard is wrong about Iran's nuclear program. And it says, in March, Gabbard testified on Capitol Hill that the US continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. And then it says Gabbard later insisted she and the president are on the same page because just like President Trump, she is a malicious liar. She is violating the trust Americans placed in her. Tulsi Gabbard now says Iran could produce nuclear weapons within weeks. So she's just towing the line. She's doing exactly what Colin Powell did before the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. So President Trump is the new George Bush Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard is the new Colin Powell. And even if Iran was pursuing nuclear weapons, people have to stop and ask themselves why that might be. Is it to wipe Israel off the map because it hates, the Iranian government hates Jewish people? Well, no, that's not true, because Iran actually has the largest population of Jews in the Middle East outside of Israel itself. And this is a Jewish, pro-Israel, pro-Western online magazine. This is an article from 2015 and talks all about the many Jewish communities that exist in just about every major Iranian city. And down here it says, Jewish life in Iran can be rich. In Tehran alone, there are 13 active synagogues, 5 Jewish schools, 2 kindergartens, and a 100-bed Jewish hospital. If the Iranian government had some irrational hatred toward Jews, these communities would not exist, let alone be thriving in modern-day Iran. So it's just war propaganda. It is a baseless lie. 5 minutes of research online could easily dispel. But many people who believe these lies about Iran don't actually care about the truth. That is the problem. And US policymakers themselves have long stated that even if Iran were to obtain nuclear weapons, they would obtain them solely for a deterrent. They understand that the use of a nuclear weapon against Israel or the United States would result in its absolute and instant annihilation. Why would they do that? And we know that because the US government, arms industry, and corporate financier-funded think tank, the Rand Corporation, published a report for the US Air Force titled Dangerous But Not Omnipotent, Exploring the Reach and Limitations of Iranian Power in the Middle East. And I wrote an article about this all the way back in 2015. I'm going to read a little bit for you. Quotes from the report. They examined the posture of Iran's military, including its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and weapons both present and possible future it seeks to secure its borders and interests with against external aggression. This is from the report. Iran's strategy is largely defensive, but with some offensive elements. Iran's strategy of protecting the regime against internal threats, deterring aggression, safeguarding the homeland if aggression occurs, and extending influence is in large part of a defensive one that also serves some aggressive tendencies when coupled with expressions of Iranian regional aspirations. It is in part a response to US policy pronouncements and posture in the region. They are admitting that Iran is merely reacting to decades of US military aggression in the region all along its borders. The US at one point was literally occupying Afghanistan to its east on its borders and Iraq to the west of its borders, right on its borders. It was completely surrounded by the US military. To a great extent, it is still completely surrounded by the US military. Let's continue. Especially since the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, which Iran had absolutely nothing to do with. The Iranian leadership takes very seriously the threat of invasion, given the open discussion in the United States of regime change, speeches defining Iran as part of the axis of evil, and efforts by US forces to secure base access in states surrounding Iran. This was written in 2009. It sounds like it could have been written yesterday, because literally nothing has changed between then and now, except the growing number of nations the US has invaded, destabilized, occupied, and destroyed, Syria being among them. Then I continue down here. The question of Iran's potential menace, should it obtain nuclear weapons, is also covered in the report. The report openly admits that Iran sees nuclear weapons as a psychological deterrent, not a practical means of war fighting. It would state, others have argued that Iran will seek to challenge the prevailing orthodoxies of deploying, posturing, and targeting nuclear weapons, believing that the mere acquisition of the bomb or even nuclear technology itself will be sufficient psychological deterrent. When people are wondering why was Iran enriching uranium beyond what is necessary for a civilian nuclear program? This is the reason why. This is the US. These are US policymakers admitting the reason why they are doing that. Not because they want a bomb to use against Israel or the United States, but because they're desperately trying to protect themselves and prevent their nation from being destroyed next in the region, after the US has repeatedly invaded and destroyed nations all along its borders and its periphery. Press statements, writings, and military journals, and other glimpses into Iranian thinking on this issue appear to support the conclusion that Tehran regards nuclear weapons as powerful psychological assets, but poor warfighting tools, meaning they would almost never even think about using them unless absolutely necessary. That is the truth. Everything that you hear in the media is war propaganda to convince you of a reality other than what actually exists. A reality that these policy papers have laid out in excruciating detail over the course of many, many years. It would also state the actual military components of this deterrent strategy include, most obviously, the drive for an indigenous enrichment capability and a potential nuclear weapon, short and medium-range ballistic missiles, asymmetric warfare and terrorism, and popular mobilization to defend the homeland should an invasion occur. While this may appear to Western observers as a push for hegemony, as the Western media constantly claims, but it is not, and it's simply war propaganda, Tehran likely sees it as a multi-layered form of strategic defense that extends deep into the enemy's camp, and they're talking about the rest of the region occupied by the US illegally, and encompasses a variety of political, military, and economic levers. And then I go into the Which Path to Persia paper and all of the quotes from that paper that I've repeatedly cited and read, laying out how the US would lie to the world, try to goad Iran into a war, and that the ultimate goal is regime change. Nothing has changed between when these papers were written and today. Many people told me that, Brian, a paper written in 2009 is irrelevant today. There's no way the United States is going to attack Iran. Literally hours after saying this, the US attacked Iran because these papers represent institutional and nation state planning. And these institutions and nation states plan in blocks of 5, 10, 20, sometimes even 50 years. So a policy paper written 16 years ago isn't actually all that old. It is still a relevant framework. The US has clearly, demonstratively used, just again, look at the table of contents. The US has literally, from 2009 until today, gone down this list and checked off every single option. They have implemented every single option. Whether it was successful or not is another story, but they have now implemented every single option except all-out invasion. They have even repeatedly tried to overthrow the Iranian government through color revolutions, terrorists, and military coups. As the Washington Post admits, they are attempting to spur defection among Iranian military leaders, and they're almost certainly trying to entice them to overthrow the government itself. So that is where we are right now with Iran. Again, the people who fail to see this coming are going to tell you that this is peace. President Trump has made a promise, and now he has kept the promise. Stop listening to these people. Start facing the truth rather than simply looking for someone to tell you what you wish the truth was. This is not over. The US posture in the region is still arrayed specifically for regime change in Iran. The United States has open plans that they are implementing right now as we speak to pivot to China and precipitate a similar conflict in Asia Pacific. The war against Russia and Ukraine continues to this day. This is not over. You have been lied to, and it's up to you whether you're going to wake up and hold these people accountable or, in your ignorance, remain complicit in this constant and increasingly dangerous undermining of peace, stability, and prosperity for everyone on Earth, including, perhaps even especially, Americans. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for all the other places you can find and follow my work. I post all of my videos on YouTube, X, Telegram, and Rumble. In the video description will be all of these links and links to the documents. People in the comment section ask me, where can I find the policy papers that you're talking about? Go to the video description, click on more, and then it'll drop down and you will see all of the links that I referenced in the video. Also in the video description are ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. There should be no ads. If there are ads, you just skip past them. They're not doing me any good at all. I don't monetize any of my other social media platforms either. So again, if ads pop up, please skip past them. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. Everyone who has been supporting my work, including people who have been supporting my work for years now, I want to give you my heartfelt thanks, especially at times like this where I feel like I'm screaming myself hoarse trying to warn people. and I get the feeling that nobody is listening, seeing people's support reminds me that at least I'm getting through to some people. And I'm very thankful for that support. And whether you're donating money once a month or just a one-time donation, or even if you have no resources at all to spare and you're just sending kind words to me, or you're sharing my work with others, especially just getting the word out there, which is what is most important, all of that is useful. All of that is greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.